Well, today's Wall Street agenda is focused squarely on the labor market. What else, right? The jobs report is out at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. Non-farm payroll is expected to rise by about 180,000 versus 222,000 in the month of June. The unemployment rate is expected to tick down to 4.3% in July versus the 4.4% the previous month. Average hourly earnings, which we just spoke about, closely watched by the Fed, they're forecast to rise by 0.3%. We're going to have, of course, full coverage of that July jobs report throughout the day here on CNBC.
Let's bring in Chris Zaccarelli. He's Chief Investment Officer at Cornerstone Financial Partners to talk about this market and the setup for the jobs report. Chris, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
What are you seeing in terms of signs of divergence between the major indices? The Russell's been weak, the Nasdaq's been weak, at least for the last few sessions, that is, with the Dow notching new record highs. What does that tell us?
Sure. Well, I think, what you're seeing is that technology story that's been so strong all year long is starting to fade a little bit, and that's why the Nasdaq's starting to come off its highs. Meanwhile, the Dow's a price-weighted index, as you mentioned earlier, and some of the larger components, the largest technology company in the world, we all know which one that is, and as well as a large industrial company that makes airplanes. Those two Dow components have really moved the Dow higher, and that's explaining some of the divergence between the S&P and the other indices. But really, the main story is just that some of these large companies are continuing to do really well, while as the Russell 2000 and other small caps not doing as well this year. And there's been a real divergence for that for the entire year, really.
All right, Chris, your clients, where are their biggest concerns? I mean, you manage a lot of money for wealthier clients and other people as well. What are the number one and two maybe issues that they come to you with? Where are their biggest concerns?
Well, far and away, people keep saying, how long can this last? They keep seeing the Dow making new records, S&P making new records. And while, being invested, you're happy to see your money continue to grow, the higher things go and the more the stories talk about how we're hitting new highs, that makes people start to worry, can it go any higher? So that's the number one concern. Number two concern for them is just, what's happening in the world. The world is changing. We have new leadership in the White House. There's plenty of stories coming out of Washington. I think there's a lot of concerns about politics and geopolitics, whether that's North Korea or Russia. And so that's very much on people's minds. That's probably number one or number two.
What's the setup for the jobs report? How sensitive is this market going to be to the jobs number, the wage number, what it could mean for the Federal Reserve, and maybe even for fiscal policy?
Sure. I think in general, every jobs number is important. You want to see a really good trend. As we mentioned, the consensus is around 180,000. So really, you need a really, really big miss, I think, to have a disappointment, or you need a really, really big positive surprise, which may get people thinking maybe the Federal Reserve will move a little bit more quickly. So if you get that positive surprise, really big positive surprise in the jobs number, it's possible, you see the dollar get a lot stronger. You see interest rates start to move higher. But I'm not really expecting a really big move, either negative or positive, just because it's going to have to be a really outsized move. I think right now the consensus is the Fed's going to take a pause in September, potentially talk about reducing the balance sheet, and they won't be hiking rates until December. So given that we have another 5 months to go until the next, 4 or 5 months to the next rate hike, I think the market's not going to be moving as much unless something drastic happens to change kind of that consensus forecast.
Chris Zaccarelli, thank you for joining us this morning of Cornerstone Financial Partners.